What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing possible cases, strange tales of vanishing towns. Possible cases meaning I don't know one way or another whether or not all of this is true. I'd be willing to make a bet on it, but it's super interesting. As you guys know, I decided a few weeks ago not to do pre-recorded content for a while and to just kind of focus on 2 live content streams a week. However, that schedule at the moment just isn't working out for me, and as much work as I put into these videos, for the little bit of views that I get, I did find that I somewhat missed the filming and editing part of the pre-recorded videos. So, as always, I appreciate you guys bearing with me while I kind of figure out what schedule not only works best for me and the channel, but for you guys as well. I am intent on putting out 2 videos a week besides Oracle, and live or otherwise, that's going to be for your viewing pleasure. It's happening one way or another. With all of that being said, we have discussed things like time rifts, portals in the woods, the almost vanished, and either people who either mysteriously appear and seem to have come from nowhere, though more often than not, it's people who alternatively disappear seemingly into the ether and never return again. I mean, across almost 300 videos in the last 2.5 years, we've covered a lot here on this channel, and I always do my very best to bring you the most up-to-date and accurate information as possible. And I even go a bit further and try to kind of feel out the information that I'm pouring through in order to see where, if at all, there is any truth or substance to it, and then report to you exactly what I feel about all of it and why. The topic of vanishing and mysterious phantom towns is one that has fascinated me ever since I came across one story being retold somewhere on YouTube at some point by someone about a group of people who stopped for lunch in a diner in the middle of nowhere while on their way home from vacation and taking kind of a road trip back home. They were greeted with strange stares and even a person or two who recognized them from this very out of the way town far away from home. It seemed as though the people in the diner knew something the travelers didn't, though, because once they realized they weren't who they were initially thought to be, it got weird. I couldn't find that particular story, unfortunately, but I will keep roaming YouTube and trolling the internet for it. I thought, wow, how cool and what a concept. It's recently come to my attention again, though, while looking for a great story to bring to you all, and so here we are. So set your flux capacitors to 80 miles per hour and let's look at some phantom vanishing towns, allegedly. In the 1920s, small towns across the American Midwest with less than 500 people were a dime a dozen. XOGemmaOX, Iowa was no different than any one of them. Located along Route 41 and with a population of less than 300 people, it was the very definition of small town America. XOGemma's residents were kind to one another but suspicious of outsiders, and if it weren't for a very strange series of bizarre events happening in it around this time, most likely it would have been a forgotten place without any memorable history to it aside from the people who were from there. So if you didn't grow up there, blink and you'd miss it. You'd forget it the second you'd driven through it for the most part. In 1929, some aerial photographs were taken of XOGemma, but the photos were very strange to say the least. From these photographs, it looked as though the town itself had been all but abandoned and in a state of complete ruin and disaster. Where homes once stood, there were empty lots, and the building and structures that were still somewhat standing were overrun with weeds and foliage. It looked downright feral and completely deserted. This may or may not have made at least the local news, but because the town of XOGemma was nothing more than a desolate backwood, the much more worrying news of the stock market crash on Wall Street overtook any chance there was of that happening. The aerial photographs were taken, and that was kind of that, at least for a while. After all, guys, the Great Depression had begun, and so people, even in the town, had much more concerning issues on their minds than some strange photographs taken of a town somewhere in the Midwest. And again, even the people in and near the town couldn't be bothered to worry about some aerial pictures when there was food needed to be put on the table and the starvation of their families to worry about. A week after the crash and the development of the town's photos, though, a motorist just passing through and driving along Highway 41 ran out of gas nearby XOGemma. He decided to just leave his vehicle on the side of the highway. He parked along the highway and went into the town to get some fuel and then walk back to his vehicle and be on his way. So walk in, grab the fuel, walk out. However, he reported that no matter how far he walked, he simply could never actually reach this town. The town at this point was visible. That's how close it was. And there was even signage along the way pointing him in the right direction. But he just walked and walked, and it was like some odd reset button kept resetting him. So he'd get within an inch of the town line and he'd be back at his car. That's basically what I understood this to be. This guy claims that he did this for 2 hours or more. So he claimed to have been walking from his vehicle to the town, which he could clearly see from his car, for more than 2 hours and never actually having arrived in the town. Finally, an end to his confusion should have come in the form of a passing motorist who took pity on him and picked him up in order to drive him into XOGemma for fuel and then drive him back to his car. As the two men drove toward the town, though, they were both commenting to each other that it seemed all but abandoned, just as it had seemed from the photographs that were taken from the air of it a week earlier. They made this assumption because of what they were seeing ahead of them, though, not from what they were seeing from being inside of the actual town itself, because, as it turns out, the same exact thing was happening to them as they drove as was happening to the original witness when he was attempting to reach it by foot. So they were seeing the surrounding areas, they were kind of looking off to the side into the town, but they were not making it to the town. They were resetting. Unfortunately, and you guys know I really hate this, but this is where this particular account ends, and we don't know what happened once they kept driving in this seemingly alleged endless loop for what seemed like hours, and we are forced to speculate and move on. These aren't the only counts of some strange happenings surrounding this particular town, though. More people came forward and said that while they made it into the town, it was abandoned. The homes were abandoned, the fields were overgrown. Some even claim they came across residents, or at the very least other human beings, but that these people were pale, zombie-like, even dreadful. These people would try to hide and seemed unable to speak or communicate with the outsiders in any way. A woman who said her name was Fatima Morgana contacted the local press after seeing the odd stories being printed about XOGemma, claiming to have been a school teacher there, still there at the time of the report, and said there was nothing odd happening in the town. She didn't know where all this was coming from, all this speculation. There was even an alleged newspaper article from one of XOGemma's town papers titled, quote, "Our non-existence has been greatly exaggerated," end quote. So the town wasn't ever abandoned. People were living there, and even though the Great Depression was happening all around them, in a small, dot-on-the-map backwater rural farm town couldn't have been doing too great as a whole or individually as the people in the town, they seem to have been able to keep their sense of humor, if that newspaper article is true, because it did make me giggle. Even with the townspeople speaking out in the news and completely debunking the stories that their town had all but been abandoned and or some tragedy or major event took place forcing them to do this, even rumors they had all simply ceased to exist without any explanation, weird occurrences in the town continued being reported by people who weren't local. They were local as in from surrounding areas, but not XOGemma residents themselves. 3 years later, in 1932, a caravan of horse-drawn wagons driven by farmers were traveling from Illinois to California, who decided to stop in XOGemma to rest their horses and pick up supplies for the rest of their very long journey. They saw the signs for XOGemma, but it seems as though the same thing that happened to that guy stranded on the roadside years earlier happened to basically this entire caravan of people. Eventually, 2 of the men from the group took the little money they had between them and did make it to the town, but realized very quickly it was in fact abandoned. The men also claimed that once they reached the general store, they were unable to go any further than up the first step. It was almost as though, once again, there was some sort of invisible reset button that was flipped each and every time they tried to step to the second step. They went so far as to put up a board on top of the stairs and climb it in order to gain entry into the store, but were thwarted again each time they got about halfway up the board, about halfway up the steps. At that point, they were right back at the beginning. They went back and told all of this to the rest of their camp that was waiting for them, but nobody believed them. About a dozen or so of the other men then traveled back with them into the town to see for themselves, but had the very same experience as well. This was back when superstition still ran rampant through villages, and these weary travelers were no different from anyone else who lived back in this time. They discussed it amongst the men, and they decided to get as far away from XOGemma as quickly as humanly possible. A report later came out based on the claims of these men and stated, quote, "The story quickly circulated, and soon a group of state police were ordered to investigate this phenomenon. They went to the XOGemma Sheriff's Office to converse, and otherwise hobnob with their brother law enforcement officials. The group's leader approached the office of this guardian of the peace and attempted to knock on the door, only to see his hand pass through the thick oak as though it were merely painted steam. Their report began the gradual decline of XOGemmaOX. It became less substantial with every passing day, and passerby noted the absence of children playing and the growing seediness of the houses and barns. Then, on May 7, 1932, Phineas Bumpf, a Huguenot immigrant farmer, passed by its lawn with his cargo of produce, and what to his wondering eyes did appear but nothing. Where the town had stood were only abandoned fields and long rotted fences. A cast iron bathtub used long ago as a watering trough for livestock sat alone in a field of weeds, the sole relic of any human presence. XOGemmaOX was no more. Many years later, a gypsy caravan camped on the site but left abruptly. The admin of the group, Baxtallo, told a Roma-friendly neighboring city councilman that the place was, quote, saturated with the tears of the dispossessed and with the despair of those who had never borne names. It's alleged that the ruins of the town and all remnants of any life that once may have existed there were covered up by the Dust Bowl and forgotten to history now. I searched far and wide for XOGemmaOX, not only where it was back in 1929 and before all this is said to have happened, but where would it be located now? What is it called now? Where would it be located, right? What's up with XOGemmaOX? I cannot find anything. In fact, I can't find anything at all about the town dating before 2015, when the site Strange State first posted all of this information to the internet, alleging the information was somehow either relayed to him by his mother or relayed to his mother by someone by way of email, then relayed to him. Very murky details here, guys, but I wanted so badly for this one to be true, I figured I would include it and let you all make up your own minds on it, and maybe even someone out there will have additional information, one way or another, as to whether or not this story is true or false, and whether or not the town ever existed in the first place. So, let's move on to another strange case of an allegedly phantom town. Doveland was allegedly in rural Wisconsin, and a charming, albeit very isolated community where the village raised the children and everyone knew everyone else. With only about 1,000 estimated residents, it wasn't unlike every other rustic, quaint little town anywhere in Midwestern America at the time. The time being back in the mid to late 20th century. However, if the reports about this town, its inhabitants, and honestly whether or not it even existed at all are to be believed, it all just simply ceased to exist somewhere in the mid-1990s. It started with people who had visited the town for one reason or another, trying to return to it, but not finding any trace of it. People who lived in the surrounding areas to Doveland also allegedly started to notice that when they drove by, they were no longer seeing signs for it anywhere, and that when they passed through where it once was, there was nothing there but empty plains and untilled farmland. It's also said that all of a sudden one day Doveland could no longer be found on the map, almost as though it had never been there at all. Aside from grainy photographs people claim were taken inside of the town itself, there were also those who came forward with mugs, postcards, t-shirts, magnets, etc. Paraphernalia and trinkets people claim to have purchased while they were in the town at some point or another. People offered all of these things as proof that Doveland had at one time been a real place in Wisconsin, despite the fact that it had, for whatever reason, seemingly disappeared altogether and overnight. Supposedly, there was even a digital or ghost trace of the town, and there are allegedly at least 2 articles one could find if they simply Googled Dublin newspapers or something similar. I'm going to let you guys handle that one and let me know what you all find. I like to keep an air of mystery here on this channel, as you all know. What keeps me intrigued about Doveland when compared or as compared to XOGemmaOX is that with that one, I could find the origin story, at least as far as when it started being circulated about on the internet, as I previously mentioned back in 2015. One of the newspaper articles is allegedly titled, quote, more than 1,000 Wisconsinites reported as missing, end quote. The other one is allegedly, gotta throw that in there, similarly titled, quote, Wisconsin's missing children. Where are they, end quote. Well, I'm not sure if it's suspicious or convenient that these articles are said to have quickly disappeared without a trace off of the internet and Google searches as soon as the story started to become more widespread. That's the kicker though, guys, isn't it? Or the trade-off, so to speak. Is it that this is all very real and a whole town and all of its inhabitants disappeared without a trace, and then the town itself literally ceased to exist, even being wiped off of maps only to have someone bring it to the internet and then they, whoever they are, wipe it all off the internet and basically off the face of the earth as some sort of grand cover-up scheme? Or is it more likely that this is all another internet hoax that keeps some people guessing and most skeptics laughing? In this community, I very much believe a lot of things are completely wiped off the internet and made to look like some kind of hoax or urban legend in order to make people question not only their own realities, but their sanity as well. However, again, it's a circular thought process because what are the odds? We just don't know and have to use all of our powers of deduction and reason to decide individually and for ourselves what we are willing to believe and what is just too much for us to be able to accept. There is at least one explanation, albeit one that is a bit more conspiratorial in nature than I will usually propose here on my channel, and that's that Dublin, the entire town, was a part of some top secret government/military experiment, that being a classified United States Navy project specifically entitled Project Sanguine. Mysterious Universe states, quote, although it was never officially implemented, it was originally proposed as a system for communication with submerged submarines using extremely low frequency ELF radio waves. According to this theory, the project indeed did go ahead as scheduled, and that was not for communicating with submarines, but rather something more sinister, perhaps even something to do with UFOs or interdimensional portals. In this scenario, something had gone wrong, and for whatever reason, the town was erased from existence, end quote. There are people who have come forward claiming to be witnesses and bringing forth evidence to back up this somewhat typical claim. They said that most of the town's inhabitants had in fact been military personnel who were in on it and knew what was happening and what would eventually become of the town should it fail. One witness stated, quote, Dublin was very real. My father lived there for a year or two and used to mention it occasionally before he passed. And the only reason I remember it is because I found it ironic that a town named Dublin was populated almost exclusively by military personnel and their families. I will dig around for a shirt when back home next in early September. If I remember correctly, the town was built as part of Project Sanguine in the mid to late 60s. Maybe everyone left when the project was canceled, but I thought something went very wrong. You can only dig up that much turf for so long before you're bound to have problems, end quote. I mean, I'm wondering, did something go terribly wrong, or did whatever they were trying to do not work out, and so everyone just simply moved on? What about the children and people who weren't in the military but were there for someone who was? For instance, a wife and stay-at-home mom and her children whose husband and father was military. It would easily be explained as just another in a long list of military moves, right? Wouldn't the kids have grown up to remember where they were born or where they grew up though? And if not, why? Were they brainwiped? What about my favorite thing to listen to, read about, and research as far as things like this go, the Mandela effect? What if this is just another classic example of a whole bunch of people remembering this town and possibly even living in it, but that didn't actually happen in this reality? Now, I know this theory is tricky because I do believe very much that the Mandela effects are a thing and that they are entirely real most of the time, mainly due to my own experience with them and knowing how easy it is for even the most unknowing and unwitting person to randomly timeline jump. It happens, guys, and pretty soon science will be able to prove what those of us in this community have known all along because we have experienced it. There are other dimensions and portals to other alternate and slightly different realities. We sometimes are able to, usually unwittingly, jump back and forth from time to time. But is it all a government and or military cover-up? I can't say for sure, obviously, but it definitely is something I would absolutely be willing to consider. Let me know, as always, what you all think in the comments below, please. Keep in mind, guys, I'm not saying one way or another. And this could all definitely be an internet urban legend and hoax made specifically to get people talking and to see videos like this one being made about it. I honestly don't know. But again, I will say I am at least very willing to entertain the fact it is something not only much more sinister, but at least in my opinion, much more interesting. Let's move on now to Ashley, Kansas. According to the legend surrounding this possible phantom town, suddenly one random day in August of 1952, residents all throughout the town began to experience some strange and bizarre phenomenon. Bright, tiny lights accompanied by what was described by many of the town's residents as, quote, a small black opening in the sky, end quote, were the most widely reported. The neighboring town of Hayes allegedly sent one of its law enforcement officers to go into Ashley and properly investigate what was happening. He claimed to have been inexplicably lost and unable to enter Ashley. As we saw in the previous two cases I just covered here in this video, this officer claimed he knew where Ashley was and had obviously been there many times before, but he couldn't seem to get past the signs for it being just a mile or two away. It was bizarre and not easily explained, and he simply did not know what to do or what to make of it all. Whilst communicating by radio when reporting back to his superiors what was happening when he was trying to go in and investigate, he allegedly said that the road into town never curved or bent at all, and that it, quote, continued along its normal path, but somehow ended up back in Hayes, end quote. More officers were sent in for backup, but they all reported being looped around and ending up right back in the city of Hayes the minute they got too close to the border of the town of Ashley. It was like no one could enter or exit the town, no matter how hard they were all trying. By now, the residents of Ashley itself were terrified, and calls flooded the phone lines in the neighboring police station there in Hayes. The main fear was the alleged portal in the sky everyone was reporting seeing, and they were all saying the exact same things. Not only was it very much there, but it was getting larger and larger by the moment. They were all terrified, and no one had any real explanation or even any kind of idea of what to do about any of it. Keeping in mind, too, there was apparently no help coming in because all help that was dispatched weren't able to even enter the town, let alone provide any assistance. That same night, amidst all the madness and frantic phone calls, the entire town of Ashley was thrown into darkness, having lost all of its electricity and power. On top of all this, it was now being reported that the children in the town were said to be having full-blown conversations with long-deceased loved ones and family members when the adults in the homes where all this was happening knew there to be no one else there with them. So basically, there wasn't even a chance anyone else was in the homes that the kids could be mistaking for a long-gone loved one. Almost immediately after they were overheard having these conversations with the dead, the children began simply vanishing in the blink of an eye, right before the eyes of all of the other family members. There one moment and gone the very next, in full view of anyone and everyone who was around at the time. Well, there was no power or lights, but still the family could see and even sense that the kids just weren't there anymore. The calls to Hayes just kept getting more and more frightening, bizarre, and even downright desperate, as once the children started popping out of existence, there were reports of some sort of fiery phenomenon in the sky, as well as the ever-expanding portal type thing. One report early on stated, quote, at 5:19 p.m. on the evening of August 13, 1952, Ashley elderly man Scott Luntz reported a growing distant fire to the south. According to his description, the fire seemed to turn the distant black into bright red and orange that seemed to extend high into the sky. Throughout the rest of the day, calls continued in, stating that the fire, in addition to moving north, now seemed to come out of the black sky. No fire was ever witnessed by any of the neighboring communities or law enforcement officials. The reports continued until 12:09 a.m. on the morning of August 14, 1952. The last phone call placed by a Mr. Benjamin Endicott reported that the fire in the sky had grown so intense that it began to appear as daytime over the town. The phone call ended abruptly, end quote. I just put this together, so it's not a part of my script or notes. But if they lost their power, there were no handheld, like battery operated, what did we used to call them, cordless phones. So how are they making these calls? Plot hole. I'm really disappointed because I wanted this one to be true. But maybe, I don't know, maybe something else was going on with the electricity and they still had phone access. When you're dealing with extraterrestrials, portals, interdimensionals, spirit, right? There really are no rules. So I'm going to keep it going. It's said that for a while, no one in Ashley could be reached by phone or otherwise until one final outgoing call from someone in town to the police in Hayes, and if it's to be believed, it is one hell of a creepy call indeed. Ashley town resident April Foster is said to have been the one who placed the call to the Hayes police station, and the call transcript allegedly reads, quote, "My name is April Foster. Please, sir, please help me. Last night they came back. They all came in the fire. My son, I saw my son last night. He was walking down the street. He was burned. Jesus Christ, he was burned. He died last year. I raised him since he was a baby. It was just me and him. I told him to watch for cars when he rode his bike, but he never wanted to listen. Everyone came back. Everyone who died or went missing, they're back and they're looking for us." He said, "Mommy, I'm okay now. See, I can walk again. Where are you, Mommy? I want to see you." "I'm hiding just like everybody else. We saw them coming through the fields and some people opened their doors for them. God, the screaming. I don't know what happened to them, but their houses caught fire and they caved in. I have my curtains down. I'm hiding in the closet right now, and end quote. The next morning was August 17th, so I guess it was like 2 to 4 days that no one was able to contact the residents in Ashley, allegedly. So it said that the next day, August 17th, 1952, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake rocked the town of Ashley, Kansas, as measured by the United States Geological Survey. The epicenter is said to have been directly under the center of Ashley proper. Police were now able to actually reach the town and get inside of it, but it was also now too late for them to do anything or really witness anything but the aftermath either. By the time the neighboring authorities were able to get there, it said that the tiny town of Ashley was nothing more than a fire-ruined, smoldering pile of ash and rubble, and there wasn't a person in sight. Not only were there no living residents of the town anywhere to be seen, but oddly enough, there were also no remains, bodies, bones, anything otherwise. The burning fissure that once was the town is said to have measured approximately 1,000 yards in length and 500 yards in width. None of the town's residents were ever seen or heard from again, and officials allegedly did their best to cover up the whole strange and terrifying ordeal. I have to say that while this is presented on more than a few sites as a genuine unsolved mystery, there is no actual or tangible evidence that any of this ever happened in this town or that the town ever even existed at all. It's another one though where we in this community especially have to really sit and think about this. With what we know, and again, what we've been coming to realize and uncover, again with the context of thinking in this community only, could something like this be possible? Is it at least plausible? I say hell yes, and to me this is the most believable one of them all. I guess it's because of things I've seen and experienced in my life and or just kind of a feeling I get where I believe it's very possible that all three of these towns so far existed and that the stories, while possibly highly exaggerated, did actually happen. And I talk a lot about that resonating feeling, right, when I bring you guys information for you to sit on. I believe it's very possible that one or all of these stories, in particular this last one in the case of Ashley, Kansas, something like this is very real. And it's also a very real possibility that it was all covered up and maybe the extraterrestrial and or interdimensional visitors and or phenomenon might not have even had anything to do with what was left of Ashley or the state that it was left in, that being a smoldering hole in the ground pretty much. It's plausible to me that our own government is the one who orchestrated that fire in order to cover up evidence of something much more terrifying and much more spectacular. But that's just conjecture, opinion, and speculation on my part. There is no historical record, no census data, and no evidence that Ashley, Kansas had ever even existed at all. There is no such record of a massive and strong earthquake having ever happened anywhere in, near, or around Kansas at that time. Something like a 7.9 would have almost certainly made national headlines. And actually, I did manage to find one earthquake on record for Kansas at all in 1952, just one, and it was nowhere near as massive as a 7.9 on the Richter scale. It happened in April, and it was barely a glitch on the radar. Again though, and I reiterate, I believe the government and military, especially in the United States, are capable of and have covered up much more than a portal in the sky opening up and causing possibly a massive earthquake overtaking an entire town. As far as I can tell, this particular town and everything that's alleged to have happened there and that happened to it did start in 2012 when it started being spread throughout Reddit. That doesn't mean that that's when it all began, but that's as far back as I could find it. It's a strange one though, and if it's all made up, then I applaud the person or persons who came up with it. Brilliant and spooky too, my favorite combo. Last but certainly not least, I want to give an honorable mention to the town of Langeville, Montana. And there's really nothing here, but it's worth mentioning. Langeville, Montana is where people, many different people, claim to have visited and even lived right up until the early 2000s. It's also said that this town would show up on Google Maps complete with street views, but just like with the others, these things are nowhere to be found or seen anymore. It's also been reported to have been showing up on Google autocomplete in searches, and that's kind of how it came to the attention of the public to be included in lists such as these, lists about phantom towns. Despite more than a few people claiming to have visited and or possibly lived in Langeville, Montana, the town now seems to have been wiped from the existence of history and no longer exists anymore. No trace of it exists anymore, had it ever existed to begin with. It doesn't appear on maps, has no historical record or census data at all either. This is quite a popular legendary town and was even mentioned in the Ghostbusters movie sequel recently. One of the characters in the movie, whose name was Agent Rourke, states, quote, "A police officer in New Mexico reports a UFO encounter. The crew of the SS Ouring Medan mysteriously dies. The entire town of Langeville, Montana goes missing," end quote. Though many skeptics claim that this legend most likely originated either in that movie or in a movie somewhere, I will say that they can't point to exactly which movie, when, or where. So the skeptics too can't prove their case for the town having not ever existed one way or the other. There are allegedly even film critics and reviewers who have publicly commented that Langeville was indeed a real place. There are plenty of ghost towns all over the world and throughout the American Midwest especially, but even they leave behind at least some remnants of their past, of having existed, right? There is surely some record of them having been there, and they are now ghost towns and haven't actually ceased to exist as a town. I'm not even sure what the actual legend behind Langeville is, though, and therefore can't really speak more about it other than what I just gave to you on it. I can't even find any kind of story of its demise or what it was like before it disappeared. It's said by skeptics that though there was a house shown in a city called Langeville in Montana on a map at one point in Google, it was only one home and it was nothing more than a glitch in the Google Maps system. I have to leave this one up in the air, and I'm wondering why it was even mentioned in my source material at all, but I didn't exclude it in the hopes that one or more of you guys will be able to tell me more about it, the story behind it, or what the deal is of and with this alleged phantom town. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content and spending this time with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and spread the love by sharing this video. Please check out the description box for some important ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, join my Patreon, and my Amazon wish list gift link, all in the description box below. Also, all of my books, the Kindle and paperback versions on Amazon, the links for those: Missing the Fae Theory, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, and Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis, and Beyond. Changed the title on that one a few times. If you want autographed copies or if you'd like a personal reading, there is also information about the personals in the description box, but you can email me for that and any other correspondence at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. It takes me a little bit to get back to you guys, but be patient as always. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, I believe in you. You're awesome. You are perfect just the way you are. Keep on trying. Never give up. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.